So we settle in and find our seats. We're gonna begin with a nigun, a wordless melody. More on that later, but I invite you to settle in. Yai da da da, yai da da da, yai da da, da da da, yam ba da da, da da da, yai da da, ya da da da, yai da ya da 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 ya da da, yai da 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 da. As Mark mentioned, as we were gathering today in this virtual sanctuary, today is the 31st day of the counting of the Omer, as we count our spiritual journey day by day from our Festival of Freedom, Passover, just a few short weeks ago, to the Festival of Weeks, Shavuot, gathering together at Mount Sinai to encounter revelation. And this is a journey in our tradition of counting day by day. Today is day 31. So the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, taught us that each of these weeks, counting up to Mount Sinai, is identified with one of the mystical sphirot, one of the dimensions of how we might access the divine. And so this week, again, as Mark mentioned earlier, is associated with Hod, sometimes translated as splendor, glory, but is associated with the midah, the characteristic that we want to be aware of in our life of humility. Furthermore, the Jewish mystics also allowed us to associate each day of each week with a different sphira. And today is Tiferet, identified with compassion and beauty, also in the Jewish tradition, literally translated as beauty, but also associated with compassion. And so as we refract the Omer through these lenses, our weekly lens and our daily lens, it is known as Tiferet Sheba Hod, compassion through humility. So one of the questions that I have been thinking about this week, inspired by my friend and colleague, Rabbi Elliot Tepperman, is the following question. How can we practice kindness in a way that is truly reflective of the humility that we're trying to hold? How can we practice kindness in a way that is reflective of the humility that we're aspiring to in our lives, that we're trying to embody each day? And he shared a quote with us, and Rachel, thanks for sharing the source sheet so that people can follow along if they would like. This beautiful quote that came from a family therapist that I believe he knows in his community in Montclair, New Jersey. And the quote goes like this, just a very simple one line. There is nothing so important that it cannot be said kindly. And I want to offer my own kind of brackets to this. We can think of kindness and compassion with the same lens here. There is nothing so important that it cannot be said kindly, that it cannot be said with compassion. And this is, I've been thinking about this one sentence all week. It takes incredible humility to practice Dr. Dumont's advice here. And one clue for us can be found in our sphira this week, the sphira of Hod, which means splendor, but it also shares some of the same letters as the Hebrew word hodayah, which means to give thanks. So at the root of this humility that we aspire to is this idea that we have great opportunity to be thankful for things every single minute of our lives if we want to step into that space. It's not always easy, but Hod gives us the opportunity to come from this place of gratitude. And in gratitude, there is humility because we recognize that we are not responsible for so much of the goodness and so much of the opportunity and the privilege that we experience in our lives. So if we're coming from that place, what does it mean to say to ourselves and to our egos, there is nothing so important to me that I should think that I'm off the hook to say it kindly or with compassion? If there's nothing so urgent, there is nothing so much like a line in the sand that has to be firmly drawn with edges and with harshness. No, our spiritual path is to try to find a way to think, to disarm that feeling in ourselves and in our ego, to think, I can dispense with the obligation to be kind because this thing is so important that if I don't communicate it right now and with urgency and with firmness, that something in the world is going to be lost. And so we kind of absent ourselves, or we step aside from really thinking about kindness and compassion. So this is kind of really something I've been just so taken with this week and thinking about, what does it mean to actualize Raymond Dumont's quote in our lives? A big challenge, but the perfect challenge for us on this day of the Omer. So as we enter into our space for quiet, I want to offer a couple of suggestions that you might want to explore a little bit. One is to breathe in Hod, right? To take a breath in such a way through this meditation that it reflects the humility and the gratitude for the very gift of breath. It is truly a free gift to us, one without which we would not be alive, right? But how often we can take that for granted and not be aware of that. So to breathe in Hod, gratitude, humility, and to breathe out on Tiferet, compassion, kindness, literally spreading that out into the world, taking in Hod and taking out, exhaling out kindness and compassion into the world. After we sit for the next 12 minutes or so, I'll bring us back with this wordless melody that I began with. And I've provided on the source sheet there the transliteration for the Hebrew. This is beautiful words that come from Psalm 104, which is the psalm that we sing actually on Rosh Chodesh when we have a new month, a new moon in the Jewish calendar. But I've chosen this text because it has our Sphira, Hod, embedded in it for this week. In splendor and beauty, you, the divine, are clothed, wrapped in light like a garment. Bless my soul, eternal one. What does it mean when I think about our refracting our Sphirot today in this day 31? What does it mean for us to be wrapped in humility also, right? Like to walk through the world and not in a way that we're lowering ourselves or beating ourselves up, but like wrapped in humility and gratitude so that everything is said with kindness. Even the things that are difficult to say are said with kindness and compassion. So I'll bring us back together with singing that Nigun. The melody was written by Rabbi Lori Matskin, another IJS friend of ours. So I invite you to breathe in Hod, to exhale Tiferet, Breathing in humility and exhaling kindness. Od v'hadar levashta, or kesala. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, hallelujah. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, hallelujah. Od v'hadar levashta, ote or kesalba. Od v'hadar levashta, ote or kesalba. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, hallelujah. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, hallelujah.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Susan Leider, for weaving gratitude and compassion and humility together and helping us ease into Shabbat so beautifully today. And friends, let's seal the practice as we do each time, offering those of us who are in mourning or observing a yard site, or if it's your custom to join in the mourner's Kaddish, to do so. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, to please stay present for those who are, and offer your compassionate support at this time of loss. Thanks to Rachel for sharing the words of the Kaddish on the screen. You can put the name or names of anyone you are honoring today in the chat now or after we recite Kaddish. And you can please join me by rising in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Yalmad, Yivrach, Yivutei, V'yamlich, V'chafei, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, V'chaye D'chol Beit Yisrael, V'agala V'zman Yimiru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevorach, Olam Ulamei, Rach, Yishtabach, Yitpa'ar, Yitromam, Yaseh, Yitgadar, Yitled, Yithalal, Shemei Kedusha, V'yichu. Ha'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, ushbechata v'nechamata, ha'amiran ba'alam v'yimru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba mincha, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Yaseh shalom b'rama, v'hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'yimru.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. And friends, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're leaving us now, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. We'll look forward to practicing together next week. A reminder that we will not be meeting on Monday due to Memorial Day, but here's the lineup in the chat for our teachers for next week. Rabbi Daniel Raphael Silverstein will join us from Israel on Tuesday. Rabbi Brian Yosef Shakur Brooks, Wednesday. Rabbi Adam Kriegfeld from LA on Thursday. And delighted, a week from today, Rabbi Shefa Gold will lead us sit into Shabbat together with Shefa. So a beautiful week of practice lies ahead. If you're leaving now, Shabbat Shalom. Be a restorative weekend. So good to be with you. And hopefully we'll see you soon. And if you're staying on, which we hope you will, you're welcome just to continue to sit with that beautiful kavanah, beautiful intention that Rabbi Susan Leider offered us, or join us for conversation, sharing reflections on your experience with the practice or asking a question. And if it's a question, you can put that in the chat, and please preface it by writing question in all caps, and that will help me keep an eye on keep an eye on the questions. Thanks so much, Susan. That was just great. Just what the doctor ordered.
Thank you, Mark.
By the way, my granddaughter is being named tomorrow by Rabbi Elliot Tepperman at B'nai Keshet in Montclair, New Jersey. And so I was really very serendipitous for you to invoke.
I should say,
thank you. That was really something.
I had no idea. That is
How about that?
amazing.
Yeah,
How
that's
about
great.
Torah and joy coming together in so many different ways.
Yeah, wonderful rabbi, and a wonderful question that he posed. I really appreciate you bringing that in about kindness. And I have something to workshop with you about that in a minute, but let's just recap a little bit and revisit this teaching. Because it's easy to get lost in the weeds with this Omer, all these sfirot and the names and the combinations, and it can get very heady. And I think you helped us ground it by inviting people to pay attention to particular quality on the inhalation and exhalation, on humility on the inhalation and compassion on the exhalation. Sometimes I found myself reversing that a little bit, feeling like, I think I should take in compassion and breathe out humility, which leads me to the question about Hod. This is the week of Hod. And like you said, the English translation is usually splendor. It's not a word that we use a lot in everyday chat. And yet it's a beautiful word. And so I love the idea of like sitting in splendor. It's a beautiful word. And it evokes, as you're describing, this kind of, I'm trying to think about what's the commonality of humility, which is associated with it, and gratitude, which you point out is associated with it. To me, what might be the common denominator is the idea of letting go, of knowing, of letting go of control, and even kindness and compassion go into that, right? But when we feel like we're right and insistent on our rightness and our point of view and making things happen, that's not, Elliot's question about how do we express challenging things with kindness requires, I think, as you were saying, humility, not just kindness, but also humility and even gratitude, right? If we're feeling like in a place of a lack, of not having enough, not being enough, not just, like in a place of need. So I just wanted to invite you to, maybe if you'd like to expound a little bit on this spira of Hod and what it means. Maybe, if you can personalize it, what it means for you to be in a week of Hod.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. So beautiful. Yesterday, I was in a workshop with about 10 other clergy colleagues on how to facilitate difficult conversations. This seems to me to be similar to the theme of the upcoming IJS offering about Shema. So this is something that we need so much. And I loved that one of the teachers in this workshop yesterday lifted up something that I learned from another one of my colleagues, Rabbi Daniel Graber. Don't know where he learned it, but we can be right or we can be in relationship. And I think that's the seat of humility. Keeping the relationship front and center versus what we want, what we hope to get out of the situation, or what we really want to communicate to the other person and have them really essentially become like us or see things our way. The other kind of way of thinking about this that I've been, percolating, I encountered Rabbi Elliot Tepperman's quote from the family therapist through the IJS clergy leadership listserv. This is those of us who've been through the training program. So it's kind of percolating that. And then I ended up in this workshop yesterday. And another way of thinking about this is the how leads to the what. And if we start off on the wrong foot with the how we speak, how we communicate, the what will be problematic, right? So we so often start with what's the what, like what is it I'm trying to communicate? What do I want? Instead of thinking how how I'm engaging with this person is really the most important thing. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with it, Mark. All these different things
Great.
percolating this week through Hod and
That's
humility.
great. Well, here's a wrinkle to throw into the mix too, in the questions, and also maybe we'll lead into this little bit of workshopping. And I welcome everyone's help in workshopping the question. But Laura asked it's about bringing in Gevura, which is setting a boundary, using strength to set a boundary, which is also all part of the mix. All these sefirot, all these qualities, none of them are in isolation from the other, are all part of it. So people are talking about difficult conversations about how to be in relationship with humility, through kindness, through gratitude, all those qualities, and how to bring in Gevura, setting boundary, which are wise for both parties while being kind and being protective when necessary. Because there was another comment, Jerry in the chat says sometimes there's the time one needs to separate with love, set a boundary, right? Just not for the purpose of connecting, but actually to separate with love when a relationship is not working or is one-sided or I guess probably problematic in a number of ways, right? So the Gevura comes in to set a boundary, sometimes to connect, sometimes to separate. It's just like that's a moment of discernment, right? About like, am I using that boundary to connect, to build is this in service of relationship, or in fact, is relationship not what's not called for in this moment, and they need to actually set a boundary and separate a little bit. So how would you put that boundary in that? Mm-hmm.
Well, an interesting example of that came up in this workshop yesterday. It just arose for me when you asked this question, Mark, is one of the midot, I guess I would say, of entering into relationship and difficult conversations is dan lakaf zechut, is to give the benefit of the doubt or to assume the best of everyone who's coming into a space. The question arose of what happens when that actually isn't the case, right? Like when after careful discernment, you're in a situation where there is someone who actually is not coming from that place,
right,
who would intend harm. This is a perfect example, an unfortunate perfect example of where Gevura is needed, right? The sense of strength and boundaries. And the answer to that dilemma in this particular workshop was to take a step back, to actually stop everything you're doing and to take a step back. And sometimes that means leaving that space. I like to think of it ideally as leaving so that you can re-enter. Right. So that when we set that boundary or exercise Gevura, it's not a permanent thing, right? It's something that we need to do in that moment for some good reason, with the possibility, not always 100%, but the intent, the kavanah, the possibility to re-enter the relationship, to reset the boundary, take the space we need, and then to figure out, is there a way to re-enter this conversation? Is there a way to re-enter this relationship? So that's a very concrete example of of when we have to step away from a conversation, but hopefully with the intent of figuring out how to re-enter.
Really good. Lori's asking also, let's bring in curiosity, which I guess is sort of in part what you were just alluding to. That curiosity has to do with that discernment about when to separate, when to pull back, when to re-enter, right? It's an ongoing process. So her question is, where does curiosity live in this rubric of qualities? She suggests maybe part of Hod or humility or beauty or chesed, all of which makes sense. To put ego aside and sincerely want to learn and feel the other in life, to make space for the other. I don't know. How would you?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if these important aspects can be laid over the sefirot, almost like we do each day. Like, what does it look like to refract curiosity through chesed or, curiosity? Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like I could go in any of those different directions, but I guess with our particular sefirah this week of Hod, when we cease to be curious, then we're coming from a place of absolute knowing. I don't know, maybe
Mhm.
that's too strong of a statement, but so I would think of it as cultivating that is directly linked to humility, because the basis of it is there might be things I don't know. In fact, one thing I'm sure of is that there are things I don't know about. So can I continue to be curious and not go to the place of conclusion and certainty? And to hold that, right in front of me. I feel like if you want to go in a different direction with chesed, with loving kindness, another one of our sefirot, you could say, one of the reasons I try to come in and offer loving kindness into the world is because I don't necessarily know what other people are going through. Like, as someone says, what battles other people are fighting, right? So if I come at that from a place of not knowing and curiosity, I wonder what that person is going through. I wonder what that person would need in this moment. I wonder what what might be causing them to feel or act this way. Then I can offer loving kindness in that space. I don't know. What do you think, Mark? Did another
Yeah,
sphere come to
ditto.
mind for
I would
you?
say I'd say ditto, and just throwing into the mix also that basically this is why we're here, right? We call it mindful. We use mindfulness as a term to describe this, but it's really a sort of a stance of not knowing, and that first of all, that's quite countercultural, maybe counterinstinctive, right? We feel like we should know, we need to know. It's uncomfortable not to know. And it doesn't mean that we're meant to always not know, but that it represents that pause, which for me is equivalent to Shabbat. It's sort of taking that time out to say, let me let the dust settle. Let me let the confusion, step away from analyzing and coming up with an answer, and have an openness, an open mind, and let everything clear so I can see more clearly, right? And then get back into it, and take a position and take a stance. And I might be right, I might be wrong, I might be partly right, might be partly wrong. But I need to build into that the humility of not knowing, right, in the moment. And I like to think about Shabbat as being that place where it's where even like knowing and not knowing are not even categories. We're just having the relief of not knowing. There is that little there's a phrase in the Talmud, to teach your tongue to say, I don't know. Um, and um, and it doesn't mean to be, not to have a position or not to take a stance or not to take any action. It just means we have to build that in. And that's why we're here every day, to
Right.
stop and pause, right? So everything, but I go along with everything you say. So listen, why don't we end, if you don't mind, with maybe one more round of that beautiful melody. And
Sure.
Rachel, if you have it handy, if you could put up the words, which are the bottom of the sheet, Psalm 104, so that we can rest in Hod v'Hadar, in splendor and in beauty, garb ourselves like the divine for a few minutes. How's that sound? Sounds
Happy
good to
to.
sounds good to me.
Hod v'Hadar levashta, o teor kesalma. Hod v'Hadar levashta, o teor kesalma. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, Hallelujah. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, Hallelujah.
Thank you so much, Susan. Always such a pleasure and zechut, privilege to get to practice and be with you. Thanks to everyone here for being here, and thank you, Rachel, so much for holding our tech space and sanctuary today. And we wish everybody a sweet Shabbat, restorative Shabbat, that's filled with with Hod, with the ability to rest in compassion and humility, and maybe above all in gratitude, as challenging as things are, just to be able to find a place of feeling full, feeling grateful, and before we turn back to the work that needs to be done in the world. So many blessings, everyone, for Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Remember, not on Monday. We'll see you back on Tuesday. Thanks, everyone. Many blessings. Shabbat
Thank
Shalom.
you.